meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the Speed Meter Steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Okay, I'll admit it, I'm a huge Monty Python fan. The original flying circus shows, the movies, the stage work, I like me some Python. And one of their most famous skits from the flying circus was the Upper Class Twit of the Year. There are three apparent requirements to be an upper class twit. First, he had to be born into money. Second, he must have no noticeable intelligence. And third, he must be completely inept at everything he does. The skit is hilarious for many reasons, one being that there really are some wealthy, overprivileged Britons that are about as useless as the Pythons depict. Yet, at the turn of the 20th century, there were many upper-class Brits that were the exact opposite. Born into money, yet intelligent, competent, and willing to take risks in order to achieve greatness. And one of the best examples of such a man is the Right and Honorable Charles Stuart Rolls. Charles was born in London in 1877, the youngest and third son of four children. His parents were Lord and Lady Langattock. His father, Baron John Rolls, owned estates in London and Wales, and was both the mayor of Monmouth and the High Sheriff of Monmouthshire. The family was very wealthy and influential, so young Charles, as the youngest, was expected to pursue either a military career or a political one. However, it did not take long to discover that neither of these paths would suit young Charles. He loved to tinker, and his passion for engineering emerged at a young age. During his primary school days, he would spend his leisure time studying mechanics and electrical engineering, conducting his own experiments in both. He would tear apart small steam and gas engines and analyze them, and work out his own improvements. He wired the servants' quarters of the London estate for electric lighting, as well as for the ancestral home in Wales. He quickly earned the nickname Dirty Rolls for his reputation to finish his day covered in the oil and grime of whatever it was he was doing. Charles entered Cambridge in 1894, where he pursued his degree in engineering. It was during this time that he found his next passion, racing. At first, he raced bicycles and was successful. By 1897, he had won many races and was the captain of the Cambridge bicycle racing team. But a new racing sport had recently emerged on the continent, auto racing, and Rolls wanted to try it himself. He and his father went to Paris in 1896, and while they were there, Charles bought a car, specifically a Peugeot Phaeton sporting a 3 3/4 horsepower engine. He took the car home to London and quickly earned himself a speeding ticket, as the Red Flag Act was still in force at the time. Thankfully, that was rescinded later the same year, and the national speed limit in Britain was raised to 12 miles an hour. Although it would be some time before true car races would take place in Britain, cars could at least be used on English roads as they were intended to be used. And Rolls enjoyed not only driving the car, but also working on it himself, doing the maintenance and repairs as needed. This was not typical for wealthy gentry of the time, as their chauffeur or mechanic would normally do this work. In 1899, Charles would drive in his first major auto race, the Paris to Bologna Grand Prix. He drove an 8-horsepower Panhard and Levasseur and finished 4th in the tourist class. He continued to drive Panhards in other races and trials, while at the same time also getting into balloon racing. So bikes, balloons, cars, whatever he could race, he would race. By 1901, Rolls was a well-known and respected driver, now driving more cars in various races and doing very well. The following year, he completed his master's in engineering and also opened up a new business in London, a car dealership. This dealership was amongst the first in England, and Rolls began to sell French Moor cars to the wealthy British public. He was very successful and even used one of his cars to establish a new world land speed record in 1903 at 93 miles per hour. He expanded the offerings of the dealership while continuing to race. He entered the ill-fated 1903 Paris to Madrid. He entered other races in 1904 and was a member of the British driving team for the 1905 Gordon Bennett race. Rolls was a force in the British automotive world in both racing cars and selling them. In 1904, a friend of Charles and fellow member of the British Automobile Club, a Mr. Henry Edmonds, introduced him to someone he knew that had recently begun to make cars, a Mr. Henry Royce. This first meeting was not particularly auspicious, but 2 years later, in 1906, Rolls would indeed partner with Royce to make their own brand of car. Now, it is true that Henry Edmonds is often titled as the godfather of Rolls-Royce, but his actual involvement was minimal at best. The man that really put them together was Claude Johnson, but that is a tale for another day. Charles was amongst the first Britons to be issued a driver's license, and he was also the second Englishman to have a pilot's license. Rolls had become acquainted with the Wright brothers and being flown by Orville himself in 1908, so now bitten with the flying bug, Charles began to tinker, making gliders at first and then his own plane using plans from the Wright Flyer. By 1910, he had his plane working quite well, and on the 2nd day of June in 1910, became the first to cross the English Channel to France and then fly back to England non-stop. He was personally congratulated by King George himself for the accomplishment. It was barely a month later that Charles was flying the plane for an excited crowd, performing an exhibition of aerobatics, landings and takeoffs, and other feats of daring. The crowd heard a loud crack, and the tail of the plane broke away. The plane plummeted to the ground, throwing Rolls from the plane, and in the process, he died later that day from his injuries. Charles Rolls was a man that broke the mold. Engineer, businessman, racer, thrill seeker. He was larger than life, and his legacy lives on. His name being proudly displayed on the finest cars in the world. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.